Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the FAA's Commercial Aviation Safety Town Hall on Zoom and on the FAA's YouTube and Facebook live streams. Before we start the town hall, I would like to provide you with just a few housekeeping rules. First, we're not here to solicit consensus advice or recommendations for anyone or to assign any tasks to the group, but we are interested in taking your questions. To submit a question, use the Q&A feature in Zoom, or if you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, we'll be monitoring the comments there too. So feel free to submit a question anytime. After the discussion, we'll hold a Q&A session where we'll give the panel a chance to answer as many of your questions as time permits. And for any reporters joining us today, please note that all discussions are for background purposes only. So let's get started. We're honored to have FAA Administrator Steve Dickson to launch this event and set the stage for discussions. Administrator Dickson, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Well, thanks, Jeannie, and hello, everyone. It is really great to be with you today. I would say, as we have done over the last few months, it'd be much better to be doing this in person. And I miss seeing everyone, but it is good for the soul to be able to gather and talk about how we work together to make sure that we maintain and continue to raise the bar on aviation safety in the United States and around the world. I am very pleased to be hosting an event with industry and with our union partners and stakeholders to discuss the state of commercial aviation safety. It's something that is very precious to us and that we always need to be working very closely together on. And hello also to everyone joining us on the web. You know, this past weekend, we had an incident of an engine failure aboard a Boeing 777 aircraft departing Denver. And we're fortunate there were no fatalities or injuries. And as we indicated on Sunday, the FAA has reviewed all available safety data following the incident. We're in the process of developing and issuing an emergency airworthiness directive that will require either immediate or stepped up inspections of the 777 aircraft using this type of Pratt & Whitney engine. Now, the NTSB, as you know, is continuing its own independent investigation, and we look forward to receiving their recommendations. But we're not waiting for that. We're acting immediately with the best data and information that we have. From the FAA standpoint, the mission of the aviation safety community is clear. We want to understand what happened and then take the necessary steps to prevent a similar occurrence in the future. We've been working on this nonstop since Saturday afternoon, and I'm confident that we will get it right. Now, the 777 incident drives home the importance of our proactive safety data collection and our data sharing efforts within the airline industry and across the agency. We collect, analyze, and share safety data with each other. We work together to correct safety problems before they can give rise to an accident or incident. This approach has led to tremendous improvements in aviation safety performance, but something that we can never take for granted. In fact, since 1997, we've cut the risk of a fatal commercial aviation accident in the United States by 94%. We have to continue to be data-driven, but we also have to recognize that the industry that existed last March, in many respects, no longer exists today. COVID-19 has created a tremendous amount of disruption and change in our system with breathtaking speed and scale. There was a major drop-off in airline operations. Thousands of pilots and other aviation professionals have taken early retirement or been laid off. Companies such as Boeing and GE have laid off 30% of their engineers, for example. And we provided extensive regulatory relief to the airlines and to other aviation sector stakeholders. But in many cases, pilots are not really flying enough to maintain their currency to the levels that we want. And in some ways, airline business models have changed, and I think it remains to be seen what they will look like going forward. Some carriers have shifted some of their operations to different airports. Some passenger carriers have gone into the cargo business. If there are complicated entry procedures for certain states internationally, this could add to duty time and crews may not be getting enough rest. And some airlines are retiring old aircraft and replacing them with newer, more modern aircraft that pilots may be less familiar with. From these disruptions, a new industry is emerging that's different in many ways from the one that existed a year ago before COVID-19. And it reminds me of the old story of the phoenix rising from the ashes and transforming into something new. The pilots in the new industry will probably have less overall experience compared to many of the veterans who have been retiring. They'll be flying a new fleet of more complex aircraft, and they'll be flying higher frequency domestic flights as a percentage of operations. Because let's face it, long haul flights will probably not be coming back in the short term. All of these changes are creating a whole new set of stressors that can inject new safety risks into the system. And we absolutely cannot afford to be complacent about that. So how do we proactively mitigate safety risk in this new aviation ecosystem with an understanding of the impacts that the pandemic has had on aviation? But we simply can't extrapolate from previous data trends that occurred prior to the virus. We need to honestly look at the system as it stands today and take proactive safety steps so we can avoid problems developing in the future. This town hall, I think, is part of a continuing dialogue that will help us understand what those steps need to be. Maybe we need more training, more FAA industry communication, or enhanced oversight. We're here today to listen to you to find out. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague, our new Deputy Administrator, Brad Mims, and ask Brad to share some of his thoughts.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome to our distinguished panel today. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to say this is my first town hall meeting since being appointed Deputy Administrator. It is so important that we continue to have a proactive dialogue about safety in commercial aviation. The public needs to have confidence and trust that the aviation community is doing everything possible to ensure safety. We have an outstanding safety record, and we must continue to maintain that record as this industry continues to evolve during COVID-19 and over the course of the recovery. As air traffic operations start to increase, the operators in the system need to ramp up safely. Airline professionals need to adapt to a higher cadence of flight. Air traffic control needs to ramp up as they begin to handle an increased tempo of operations. We have to ensure adequate staffing at facilities where needed. We've become very proficient in cleaning our air traffic facilities during slow traffic periods. This way we can ensure employee safety while reducing the operational impact due to facility closures. As we ramp up collectively, we must continue to rely on our respective safety management systems. Our data and our performance shows that we do have a lot of safety redundancy in the system. And the lessons learned, we've learned from COVID and past pandemics, in part through safety management systems, will help us navigate the path forward. So it is vital that the FAA, labor, and industry continue to collaborate and share safety data. And it is vital to everyone in our system. It is vital that everyone in our system continue to submit safety reports, share safety concerns. This will give us the best picture of threats, hazards we face, and the corresponding risks to our operations. We must continue to share lessons learned with our aviation counterparts around the world because we're all dealing with the same issues. COVID-19 being the most acute. On that note, a year ago, many people wouldn't have predicted the ways that COVID-19 has affected aviation. Just as many people not be thinking about the climate, just as many people are not thinking about climate change could affect aviation safety in the future. We're seeing hurricanes and other storms becoming more intense, and that could create safety risks for aircraft. We will address this proactively. The final point I want to make is that, and this is a perfect time to think ahead about recruiting the next generation of aviation professionals with a laser focus on those who continue facing barriers to enter to the profession. The administrator noted that many aviation professionals are opting for retirement because of COVID-19. So now is the perfect time to reach out to the next generation and get them excited about aerospace. The FAA and industry have many efforts underway to recruit more pilots, maintenance technicians, air traffic controllers, and other professionals. We want the best and brightest and most diverse group of people from all walks of life. I look forward to working with everyone to recruit more women, minorities, and people from underserved communities to join us in meeting our aviation safety goals. So with that, Jeannie, I'll turn it back over to you, and so we can get our discussion going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now we'd like to invite the panel to join us. And with us today, we have Jenny Boyle of the FAA, Acting VP System Operations Service with the Air Traffic Organization, Chris Carey, Horizon Air, Managing Director of Safety, Rick Domingo of the FAA, he is the Executive Director of Flight Standards Service, Captain Dave Hunt of Southwest Airlines, the Senior Director of Safety Management Systems and the Director of Safety, Captain Steve Jangelis, who is the Safety Chair of the Airline Pilots Association International, Sasha Johnson of United Airlines, Vice President of Corporate Safety, Captain Houston Mills, Vice President of Flight Operations and Safety at UPS, Paul Myers, Vice President of Safety and Security at Omni Air, Paul Rinaldi, President of the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, Ron Thomas, Vice President, Safety, Environmental, and Regulatory Compliance with American Airlines. And now Administrator Dickson will start with some questions for the panelists. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Jeannie. And again, this will be, I think, a lot of fun, an important topic, but it is great to see everybody today. And thank you for your leadership and your participation to collaborate on safety. We're going to start out with kind of a lightning round here. So we'll get the juices flowing here a little bit. We're going to go around the virtual table and just quick answers on how has the industry evolved to improve safety? How have you adapted in your organization to overcome the challenges over the past year? And what kind of steps have your organizations taken? And we'll start with Jenny Boyle from SysOps.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Steve. Well, managing a geographically diverse workforce is challenging during the best of times. With COVID, believe it or not, communication and collaboration lines with employees have been strengthened to ensure all of our teammates feel valued. We've been able to include team members in activities they traditionally wouldn't be involved in, which helps employees close to the team and overall mission. And as most of the folks on the call, we quickly learned what Zoom was, and out of necessity, we stayed connected. So conducting routine and regular one-on-one chats also brings the employees closer to the fold by allowing them to have a voice within leadership. We also have incorporated more frequent town halls to keep our employees engaged and connected.
Thanks, Jenny. Let's move to Chris Carey from Horizon.
Thank you, Administrator. I echo what Jenny has said about communication. We've seen such enormous change in the industry over the last year, and this change is more personal for a lot of people. It affects our guests, our employees, and their families, the safety of the traveling public, and the safety of our own employees while they're at work, and how we look at the new hazards that COVID has brought into our airline. How are we adapting to those to maintain the fundamental underlying safety system that we have in place? And then how are we engaging everybody on this change to make sure that they understand the why the change is important, and why they need to keep doing what they're doing and following processes so that we don't see any lapse in the great safety culture that we've built.
Great, thank you. Rick Domingo, any comments from your perch here within the agency?
Certainly. Thank you, Administrator Dickson, and good morning and good afternoon to all of you. 3 areas that we saw in flight standards that were challenges to us. The first one is very similar to what Chris and Virginia talked about, is the workforce leadership connections and staying communicated. Another area we looked at challenges was planning and targeting our surveillance activities. And then finally, the third area was adapting to new and innovative surveillance and technologies that we use, such as this. So let me start out with the workforce connections. Very similar to what Virginia had said. We step up our cadence of meetings with leadership and our workforce to make certain our comm channels remained open. And then as far as our planning surveillance activities, we looked at best practices and of course use risk-based decision-making to target our activities. Last area was just being very adaptive to industry needs and looking at new and novel ways to conduct our business.
All right, thanks, Rick. Dave Hunt, from your perspective.
Hey, good afternoon. Hi. We're just like every other airline. We have ingested a lot of change over the last year. Where we operate and how we operate look much different than it did a year ago. And what we've learned is how important our safety management system is. And we've really leaned in on our SMS and the value that it brings to our operation. The cleaning, the disinfection, how we operate with masks on, social distancing. We have to be very careful that all these changes that we're rapidly introducing aren't increasing overall safety risk, and that we're not bringing new hazards into the operation. And then additionally, all of the changes that we implemented, we were able to rapidly identify if they were performing as intended through our very proactive assurance monitoring function. So we were able to very quickly evaluate whether any of the changes we made were working as intended, or if there are any unintended consequences, and adapt and change at a very rapid pace. So I would say primarily we've learned how valuable SMS is. It works, and it really is the key to managing the risk that we could be facing with all these changes.
Great, thank you. We'll move now to Steve Gengelis. And Steve, good to see you. You're wearing a couple of hats today, right, from ALPA and also from the ASIAS perspective as well. So appreciate your leadership. But how are things looking from your perspective in terms of evolution over the last year and adaptation to the environment that we're in?
Well, Mr. Administrator, thanks for the invitation. And yes, wearing 2 hats, it's a good thing because I get to work with a lot of really good people around the table. And I think that's the key, is the collaboration. One of the things that we noticed early on at the Airline Pilots Association was we represent 35 airlines across US and Canada, and all demographics are represented. And what we started to do was monitor the risks and trends we were starting to see, because you had the world's safest aviation transportation system stretched like a tight rubber band prior to COVID. And immediately it was released because passenger traffic dropped to 80%, cargo traffic increased. So that completely turned our operations tempo upside down, as many of the airlines here can attest. So what we did was we collected 35 different airlines' views of what was happening from their pilots from the front door of the airplane, basically telling us this is what we're seeing out on the line, whether it involved cleaning the airplane or providing them PPE or operational tempo things. Now you have airlines that are, like you said earlier, bringing cargo on board passenger airplanes on the top deck where normally there would be passengers seated. So a number of those risks were identified. And the best part about it was we were able to meet weekly, which only would happen maybe once a quarter. So we were able to get those inputs together, collect the data, and as we pointed out, data is the key, and then presented to many of the folks here on this call, like to Mr. Domingo, about what we're seeing, trends that we're starting to beam in on, and nip those issues in the bud early, getting everyone together at the table.
Great, thanks, Steve. Sasha, how about from United's perspective? I know one of the things that you guys are right at the forefront of, and that was vaccine distribution very early on from the first flight coming over from Brussels.
Absolutely, yeah. And I need to, again, just thank the FAA for that collaboration, which made that possible. It was so key, I think, towards giving people some hope that the vaccine was on the way. And we were really proud to do that and to work with the FAA and the entire team there. I think our experience is very similar to what you've heard. I really, what Dave said about SMS and what Chris said about communication, all of those things have been key. We've obviously really leaned into our SMS structure as we've looked through this change. But, adaptation, we're going to continue to do it right. I think one thing we realized early on was that change was going to be the constant. And so obviously we put safety at the center of everything we've done. But one thing we've done internally is, in addition to that SMS, to really make sure we have the cross-divisional structure so we can make decisions safely, nimbly, and be as agile as possible, because we're going to see more international travel restrictions probably. Who knows what's going to happen with a vaccine as more people become inoculated? What do those entry requirements look like in international jurisdictions? What health monitoring is going to be required of crews? There's still a lot of unknowns and change that we're going to need to adapt to. So the one thing we've really tried to do inside United is to make sure we have the communication channels and the structure to manage that decision-making process safely. So that's what I would share with the group. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, Steve.
Thanks, Sasha. Always great to see you. Houston, UPS has actually ramped up somewhat and has really been a key part of the supply chain, obviously, in the country, and vaccine distribution and everything. And I know we've worked very hard to keep the airspace running, throughout the months, which we'll talk about a little bit more here later on. But how are things looking from your perspective at UPS?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Administrator, and what an honor to be here with these distinguished guests. I would say two things, echoing the SMS piece. I think one thing we've learned is that SMS works and that you can apply it in a lot of different areas, particularly in this occupational health space, which is kind of a little non-traditional. So we're very quickly able to know, take this incredible tool, gather data, and make sure we're mitigating the risk firsthand. The other thing we did very quickly, we found, just because, you can get so focused on COVID, you forget about everything else. So in order to manage the COVID distraction, we set up a COVID task force, almost an alternate operations team, if you will, to specifically focus on the contact tracing, all the occupational health issues associated with COVID, the cleaning protocols, et cetera, so that we could take that out of our operations and focus on our daily ops and compliance, without missing a beat. So I think those two things working together, over time, we become much better because we found that COVID itself can become very disruptive, and if you focus too much energy there, you can lose sight of other things.
Well, thanks, Houston. Appreciate your leadership. And I think you make a great point on, as we got into the initial phase of the disruption to our operations around COVID, that using our SMS processes to make sure that we reduce distractions to the greatest extent possible was really important. So I think those comments are very well placed. Let's move now to Paul Myers from Omni. Paul, share your perspective, please.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Well, from the onset of the pandemic, supplemental carriers have had to innovate flexibility into our safety management systems. Over the past year, our business has navigated COVID-19 while ensuring we remain focused on managing risk. But that storm isn't really over, as changing restrictions worldwide make it increasingly difficult to operate in support of our government. As the operational environment continuously evolves, supplemental carriers have had to focus on rapid risk analysis to meet the ever-changing need of our customers. Much of our focus during the COVID-19 pandemic has been centered around keeping our workforce healthy, safe, and employed. We've kept our workforce safe by implementing the FAA's Safe on Occupational Health and Safety Practices. Our ability to serve our customers in 2021 and beyond relies on this SAFO and the critical infrastructure workers language as we focus on keeping our employees healthy in response to COVID-19.
Thank you. All right, we'll move to get another perspective from our colleagues at NATCA, from where the rubber meets the road in the air traffic operations. Paul Rinaldi, what any comments to share with the group about our journey together here over the last year?
Thank you, Administrator Dickson. Well, it was about a year ago when we had our first positive of air traffic controllers at Midway and Las Vegas, and we realized we need to develop some protocols and procedures really quick and get in line with CDC guidance. And through communication and collaboration, I'm proud of what we developed on the fly. There was no plan, there was no playbook to go look at. And we developed how to get some real hospital-grade cleanings in our facilities where we had positive cases. We established constant telecons with our JCAT telecons to make sure every time we did have a possible or even a positive, that we were able to do contract tracing. We developed standby crews that we could put in another crew, and really worked this crazy balance of keeping the system up and running and protecting the workforce at the same time. And it is still ongoing, and we continue to evolve. And right now, I'm proud to say we're doing level 3 routine cleanings, hospital grade cleanings in our facilities now, so we can limit the amount of ATC zeros. But it has been an incredible journey. And keeping the safety of the workforce first and foremost in our eyes, and keeping that system up and running has been a huge success.
Thanks, Paul. Your leadership and working, with our managers and facilities has been absolutely critical to our nation's success, not just the aviation system. So thank you, and we'll talk more again in a minute. Let's move now to Ron Thomas.
Thank you, Administrator. One of the things I'm going to make unanimous is that our SMS program was one of those things that we didn't really have to adapt. It's built around change, and it's served us extremely well through this. But one of the things that we have found is that we cannot assume that our operations is going to get back to normal. There is now a new normal. So we're taking into account all the changes that we've experienced, creating a new business plan around them. Some of the things that we have adapted are virtual technology. We partnered with the CMO to create an FAA virtual inspection process. We've created more instructor-led virtual training. Built numerous customer and team member self-service applications. We simplified our fleet. We've gone from 9 fleet types to 4. We've enhanced our voluntary programs. We've taken this opportunity with all of the interactions that we've had with our union partnership, and it's built a stronger ability to move into our ASAP with our ramp and GSAP folks. We're expanding our LOSA from just the flight department to the dispatch, and hopefully ramp and tech ops to improve that. And then finally, of course, our health and safety program, just like Houston had talked about, we have a very robust health and safety program, and we see that staying in place for the foreseeable future. Thanks.
Well, that's great. I think you raise a good point about we've all talked about SMS, but the voluntary reporting programs aspect of that on safety issues has been extremely important. Allowed us to be much more agile and responsive to events as they developed, and also made sure that we were really seeing what was happening in the daily operation. It would be much more difficult without those programs. So, thank you. All right, so that was the quick lightning round, if you will. we move on to a question here for Paul and Jenny. And we'll start with Paul. But how is the current situation that we find ourselves in affecting the FAA's workforce? And again, we'll get NACA's perspective, and then Jenny will speak for air traffic from SysOps.
Yeah, we've disrupted their workforce tremendously, and they've consummate professionals in understanding why we need to do this. It's a profession that you can't socially distance. You're even when you're wearing a mask, you're at times 18 inches apart from each other. So it was a deep concern to make sure that we can keep the system up and running, and make sure at the same time that the workforce is protected and safe. We established the backup crews, and that was a change to their negotiated watch schedules, which was a tremendous thing to do. But it was with little chirping, they understood what we were trying to do. We were trying to protect them from this disease, and at the same time, keep the system up and running. We had to stop OJTI training, on the job training, because that is something that it was just, CDC guidelines. We could not perform any type of training like that, because we would be too close to each other. We had to take our high-risk employees, our women that were pregnant, and people that have, continuing problems with some diseases, and we had to get them out of the work environment because we wanted to protect them. I'm proud to say, in a world where people were debating on if masks were important, that we worked collaboratively to find a way to get masks to the facility and establish that the transmissions could be heard to the aircraft over the frequency. We did some tests of facilities here in Washington, D.C. And now we have mask protocols in our facilities, which is helping quell the spread. So our controllers are very resilient, and we smile at some of the times of the things that they have done when a facility went down with a positive test, from working outside with handheld radios from the top of a parking garage to see the runway and work airplanes in and out of Palm Beach, to go into airlines operation ramps on big airports and using that as a backup. It is really amazing the will that they have just to keep the system up and running, and to run it safely and efficiently. Over the past year, 3,500 positive cases of COVID in the FAA. And honestly, I'm proud to say that very, very little disruption to the national airspace system when you think about the level of exposure that all our employees were at risk, and that we were able to keep that system up and running, and certainly keep them safe. So, and that's I take a big credit of it, but I give a big credit back to you guys. The controllers have a big credit, but the leadership in the FAA, you and Terry Bristol have done an outstanding job. And when Dan Elwell was here, an outstanding job of developing and working this collaborative relationship and communicating it down to the lines of business. It has truly been, it's masterful what you guys have done. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Paul. I mean, it's been as you say, a tremendous team effort. And I was thinking about, as you were talking about Midway, I think it was on the afternoon of March 17th, as I recall. And I remember having to call Gary Kelly at Southwest Airlines and tell him we were going to have to, close the tower. And it took several days to get it back up. And, we were dealing with challenges with local public health officials. And, I know you and I spent a lot of time on the phone, and our teams had got up on the step. And to think about where we are now, and where we got to within a very short period of time is a real testament to working together. And the day after Midway, I think we had an earthquake in Salt Lake City that took the tower out there. So you've got other things going on outside the pandemic at the same time. So hats off to you.
No call it on in March at that point. Yeah,
that's right. Okay. Well, Jenny, how about from the agency's perspective? You oversee the system. from SysOps, and so you've got a very broad system view. What can you share with us on how our FA team's been affected?
Right. And then I also run the JCAT, which is the Joint Crisis Action Team, where we all collaborate on all these calls. Well, as Paul said, the safety of our employees is paramount, and the collaboration that we've done throughout almost this last year has been exceptional. Our focus has always been to reduce the impact to the operation, as well as keeping our people healthy. We partnered internally, air traffic, aerospace medical, SysOps, TechOps, both NACA, PASS. We've all been collaborating all through this process. And really what a difference, like you said, a year makes on these COVID cleanings, because what has really been an evolution that's been going on, and through collaboration, and Paul's been on many of those calls as well, about trying to do some enhanced level 3 cleanings. Since the beginning of January to present, we're up to, we earmarked 85 facilities, which would be all the centers, major TRACONs, the core 30 airports, plus the sprinkling of other facilities. So we targeted 85. As of this morning, we're up to 77 facilities that are doing this enhanced level 3 cleanings. And just in that short amount of time, we've saved over 60 of the old school kind of level 3 cleanings that we used to do, which probably had, I don't know what else to call them other than a save of potential ATC alert or zero events that we've been experiencing. So great collaboration. And also I wanted to say that, within the facility, we've developed these COVID contingency routes. We communicate those through the FTC NOTAMs, HRX, which is also in my service unit. We standardized the NOTAMs so that the COVID contingency routes and emergency procedures were published for the airlines to ensure that they had the safest, most efficient route during some of these events. And just hats off to everybody on the call. Great collaboration throughout the year. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, the JCAT has played an especially important role in decision support, consistency of process, but also being able to have enough flexibility built in to bring in resources and expertise, because each one of these situations can be a little bit different, but we want to handle them consistently across the system. So thank you. All right, well, kind of the same question, more for the industry. How's the current situation affected your workforce or your members? And we'll go first to Ron Thomas for the passenger carrier perspective, and then to Houston for cargo, and then Steve for labor. So Ron, any comments on effects on your workforce?
Yes, for American, what it means is a smaller, more senior staff than pre-COVID. Everybody's taken on a little bit more responsibility. More importantly, we've made sure our team members understand that this is not a temporary event for us. We've had to look at everything we do post-COVID and not assume status quo. The Payroll Support Program, or PSP, has preserved many jobs, and we're extremely thankful for it. But at a large airline like American, the short duration cycles have created some turmoil. So our teams have gone from furlough to recall. Now they're looking at another potential furlough and hopefully a recall if the timing's not right. All of these changes for us have to go through contractual bidding, and it takes weeks, if not months, to accomplish. So it makes that very difficult and hard on them. Many of them have gone through job changes as well as location changes and training. Initially, we had a proficiency issue with many groups. Now it's more about training and job experience levels. Generally, we actually see it's safer during these periods of time because team members tend to slow down, pay more attention when they're in a new position. So that's a positive side effect. Unfortunately, we continue to see high levels of distraction at work and at home. And lastly, our COVID-19 compliance is still good, but we're hearing from some and seeing some COVID fatigue. So we're doubling down our efforts to communicate and remind our team members that while they might get tired of the virus will not get tired of them.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just pick I'll pick up, thank you, sir. I'll pick up on where Ron, that COVID fatigue is no joke. I think as I look at the impact on our workforce, literally it's been nonstop. If you think about the testing protocols, both domestic and especially international, the changing rules that our pilots have to deal with. And one of the great things about this profession is you get to travel and see the world. Well, COVID has really put our folks on lockdown. So now when you travel internationally, you're locked down to the hotel. So the whole experience is changed. It's just different from that perspective. And certainly it's one of those dynamics that we continue to work through. I will say this, I'm so proud of our folks. They have leaned forward. As you mentioned, Mr. Administrator, all the PPE requirements, the vaccine requirements, you just go on and on and on. And in the face of all this activity with COVID, our workforce and many others across the board have leaned into this pandemic to serve the world. So I'm very proud of that. I think the other thing that our workforce says that we've had to focus them on is kind of connected to the SMS. And we've done a really good job, working with our CMO in particular to really bring home the safety attribute of safety ownership and understanding operational pressure, because it's a different type of pressure. Unlike Ron in the passenger industry, we've actually been buying aircraft and hiring pilots. E-commerce has really boomed in addition to all the PPE and the vaccine. So we've been the opposite direction, running fast. So we really had to slow people down and make sure they understand that ownership piece, that they don't allow the operational pressures of trying to do the right thing to become a safety issue along the line. So I think that combination of COVID fatigue, safety ownership, controlling and understanding operational pressure, it's been a dynamic that we continue to work through. But again, I'm just so proud of our folks for leaning into this and really helping us serve the world.
Thanks, Houston. Steve?
Well, I echo the comments of my colleagues, Ron and Captain Mills. I'll tell you, it's been interesting. Like we say, it's a tale of two cities, where you have the passenger side that dropped off 80%. Cargo side has increased in leaps and bounds, including some passenger carriers jumping over and doing all cargo operations. One thing that we noticed early on was there was a lot of stress and anxiety placed onto our crew members, whether there was a concern of perhaps the doors shutting at their airline, which some did, downgrades, forced retirements. Those really added stress to our system, and a pilot's skills atrophy as they wait and sit. You can't just put them on a shelf and pull them down and expect them to be perfect every time. So it's important, and the regulator, the FAA, has done a really good job of making sure that we have benchmarks, 3 landings in 90 days. We had a number of pilots go out of that currency window, but working with data and working with our stakeholders here on this call, we were able to come up with a plan to make sure that everyone stayed current, because when this does return, we want to be able to snap right back and welcome the traveling public back into our skies and move that e-commerce that Houston mentioned earlier. So we had to make sure that the skills stayed intact. And I think that we got a lot of help from our airline partners as well as from the FAA. I'd be remiss to not pass on a comment about what happened this weekend. Normally our organization does not comment on that. But one thing I wanted to point out was that, we had a great outcome with what happened this weekend. And I think a lot of that was due to the training and the requirements and the regulations that stipulate, what a pilot has to know to bring an aircraft back. But it wasn't just a union pilot. It was also a union air traffic controller and a union flight attendant that was there to make sure that those passengers were safe. So we had a good outcome because those people were in place. And, if we're going to continue going down the safety road of being the safest air transportation system in the world, we have to continue thinking about the people that are on board the aircraft. And I know that there's some manufacturers and some airlines that are looking at training and another pilot as a line item. I hope we'd rethink that, looking at what happened this past weekend.
Thanks, Steve. No, great comments and great perspective. We're in a technical profession that requires a very high level of skill, but it's made up of people and making sure that we're taking care of them, making sure that they're trained and qualified is among the most important things that we do. So thank you. Out of any crisis, a lot of times for those who are able to, there are opportunities that present themselves. And, we still have some issues around that we need to be focused on as an industry. And so even among the challenges with COVID and what the economy is going through right now, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we're doing to ensure that we continue to attract and do more to attract a broad and diverse pool of applicants into the industry, and make sure we're promoting racial equity in our hiring and leadership development opportunities. So the question is, has the current situation created new opportunities that might not have existed before? And I'll ask Brad Mims to share his perspective, and then we'll move to Chris Carey. Brad? See if we've got him still. I don't know.
Sir,
Brad, are you
I'll
there?
I'll see if there's a connection issue, and we'll come back to the deputy.
Okay, how about Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Administrator. It's a very timely question. At Horizon Air, and we're a wholly owned subsidiary of Alaska Airlines. We've recently announced 3 corporate goals aimed at creating a more diverse and inclusive workforce. So our goals are set out over a few years. We know this takes time. It's not a needle we can move overnight, but we want to see a sustained effort in this space. And so by 2025, we're making a goal to increase the racial diversity within our leadership team. We want to see at least 30% of diverse people filling all levels of leadership. That's from your frontline supervisor all the way up to our vice president positions. Additionally, by 2025, we're working to increase our internal inclusion index score through our employee engagement surveys to make sure that people feel like once they come, they have an organization where we can cultivate an inclusive culture where everyone feels like they belong and they can grow a career. And finally, again, by 2025, we're going to work on supporting up to 175,000 career pathways for young people through the support of various education and industry outreach programs, and to grow that next level of talent, right? We need to start thinking about, hiring our next diverse candidate today. And so how do we do that? We, the different organizations, and we'll be revisiting those throughout the year as they come up and we make progress.
Thanks, Chris. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll move on to FAA's interactions with industry. And of course, this is an example of a change that we've had to adapt to over the past year. So let's talk a little bit about, how are you and your organizations leveraging the virtual technologies to continue interactions with industry? And we'll start with Rick, and then we'll move to Dave Hunt, and then Sasha.
Thank you, Administrator Dickson. Great question. And like you said, this is one of those venues that now has become standard operating procedure for us. And I look forward to taking that as we move forward as a common method. For flight standards, I think one of the things that we've learned throughout this whole situation we've been in with the pandemic is that we need new ways of doing the same business we've done before. And VCT is one of those platforms that we've used in certification activities and surveillance activities. We issued 2 memorandums to our workforce to consider, okay, what would you consider and for procedures to use when you wanted to allow a VCT type platform to be used. Then also the fact that we wanted to refresh everybody in our policy that it is allowable. It's just that the circumstances that we run into, and when you hear of the other panelists talk about the operations that are ongoing and ramping up or coming back online, that means that we have been there with them at times, all the time, to be able to enable these operations, even spooling back up and ramping back up. You can't do that from sitting behind a chair. And so I think these VTC platforms like Zoom and others that we've constantly used now at least gets the discussion going. And I think that's one thing that that I do want to focus on. We've used VCT in areas of FaceTime to review training records, interact with certificate management personnel. We've used remote cameras, including an audio feed in flight simulators. We've used GoPro cameras on flight decks. And I'll stop there and say that while we have to be cognizant of all the sensitivities behind that, I think we with industry share the common interest that we're looking to get the job done that needs to get done right. And so we'll continue to look at those areas. And in fact, we'll probably expand on those as we move forward.
Thanks, Rick. Dave? I forgot to unmute. Never done that before.
Yeah, welcome to virtual meetings.
Yeah.
Dog barking here soon. It'll be official. So yeah, thank you. At first it was clunky, and when we went to virtual, because we're designed for face-to-face meetings, and the work we do requires very close personal working relationships and collaboration and open and honest communication. And when you're sitting across from each other, it's a lot easier to facilitate that type of discussion. So at first it was a bit challenging, and we were on WebEx and the FAA was on Zoom. We didn't do Zoom at our company. We transitioned to Microsoft Teams, and the FAA was very responsive and was able to transition quickly. And since then, it's worked really well. And what we've recognized is it's a challenge for our local CMO office to have visibility into what our operation looks like. They don't have as many inspectors out in the field as they have in the past. So we've really committed to being open and transparent, and we've dropped the barriers down. We invite the FAA into meetings that they weren't previously in the past, and the virtual environment allows us to even have meetings where the entire office is really welcome to participate. And so what that has done for us is it's really helped us to see how expanding our communication base and the people we communicate with has been very beneficial overall to the working relationship. So when we get back to face-to-face meetings, I assume we'll still have some virtual meetings because we like the broader audience that we're able to bring into. And some of those back office procedures, that SMS work we did behind the scenes, we're able to open up the doors and let the FAA see how we do that work as well. And so we anticipate that work continuing.
All right, thanks. Sasha, what's your view?
Yeah, no, I would agree with a lot of what Dave said. I think it has allowed for the increase in frequency of communication, which has been absolutely critical during this difficult time. It absolutely enabled the resumption of operations and other changes that we needed to make, like Rick said. I would say that it's also added some additional benefit, and that, from our CMO and other FAA personnel have actually been able to take part in some technical classes that United has been able to offer. We've been able to invite them in. I think the other thing that has been really interesting is within United, we've actually been able to invite some safety SMEs who might not have had regular interaction with the FAA to those meetings, so they can watch that interaction and learn and sort of further build their safety understanding and understanding of what that dialogue is like with the FAA, which ultimately will have a terrific benefit to safety going forward. But I agree with Dave. I think, there have been benefits to this sort of easy access and collaboration and more regularized meetings. And I bet that even though we all want to be back together and we want to have these meetings in person, that some of this will still continue going forward.
I agree. Thanks, Sasha. So we've talked a lot about domestic here in the last couple of questions. But for Rick and Jenny and Steve, what has the FAA and industry done to engage international partners during the pandemic? And we'll start with Rick.
Thank you, Administrator Dickson. So we've done a lot, and I think we're going to hear a lot of this with the colleagues on this question as well. Since the pandemic started, of course, we've conducted over 300 virtual surveillance activities and audits and meetings with certificate holders in 43 different countries. We have our domestic operations, but the FAA is plugged in across the world, and I think that's an important aspect. We've also, when we crafted up some of our early exemptions and also a special FAR 118, which encompassed a big sector of the industry, we coordinated all that work with ICAO. And that special SFAR was one where we gave specific provisions for experience testing and checking requirements for pilots because of the COVID-19 environment. and the pressure that had on the assets that could normally get that work done. We looked at, that SFAR being in alignment with all the ICAO regulations and guidelines, and we shared information with our partners across the world. And I think that was unique in the sense that keeping everybody, I think somebody said it earlier, COVID-19 is the same everywhere you go. It's a very dangerous thing to have out there. So dealing with it in our operational world is common across many different countries. And I think that was the benefit of us coordinating all those activities. We also worked and had subject matter experts aligned and working with CART, the ICAO Council on Aviation Recovery Task Force. I think that was also an important piece for the FAA to stay engaged, understand, and help lead the world when it comes to getting a common interest across the board on how we would look at recovering from this pandemic. We also looked at, right now we're dealing with other authorities directly. One of them would be the UK when understanding what happened over there. We've been dealing with them directly to understand what they're seeing in their environment. So we haven't stopped any of that work, and we continue to do that and learn from our other authorities across the globe.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Jenny and Steve, any comments on international?
I do, if that's okay, if I jump in. So we've coordinated efforts with the ATO International and ASH to develop international standards for identifying priority flights for the distribution of the COVID-19 vaccine. And then we had a joint effort with NAV Canada, Eurocontrol. We promoted the use of the IOK message in Field 18 of the ICAO flight plan to identify the flights requesting priority due to the critical nature of the flight carrying the vaccine. And then we also emphasized the message was not to be used with every flight carrying the vaccine, but only to those flights whose delay would have a negative impact on the delivery of the vaccine as it was identified by the flight operators. And then I just wanted to take an opportunity right now to thank the industry partners in this endeavor, because many of their flights carry the vaccine, but they're only annotating the most critical of the flights. In addition, the flight operators were asked to include vaccine in the remark section of their flight plans. And the joint announcement of the usage of the message from the FAA, NAV Canada, Eurocontrol included the FAA Command Center procedure for notifying the Command Center of the identified critical flights. And to Sasha's point, I was at the Command Center, the first United flight that came from Brussels. And I will have to tell you how excited, honored, the whole room was full of hope, but so it was just really exhilarating to be there and to be part of that. And, it's overwhelming to where we can go here in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Steve?
Well, I'll tell you what, safest air transportation system in the world. I've said it a few times. How do we get there? I get asked often, why are we at this position in the world? And it's because of data sharing and collaboration. I'm very convinced of it. One great thing about, our organizations that the FAA has set up and administers is that it brings all the stakeholders to the table, and involving the Commercial Aviation Safety Team, otherwise known as CAS, and the Aviation Safety Information Analysis and Sharing Program, which I'm the industry co-chair for, otherwise known as ASIAS. We're taking these data points that we're collecting throughout this COVID period and putting them together and compiling them for our carriers and for our airlines and for our operators around the airport, trying to find best practices, issues, risks, identifying those risks and how to mitigate them. And the best part about that is, these airplanes don't just stay here in the United States. They fly to other places. So we want to make sure that that data gets spread out around the world. And I have to commend the FAA for its outreach, working with Department of State to get that information out there and bring those people in and sit in these meetings with us and see how we collaborate, where you have airlines, labor, the regulator, all talking the same language and working together. So it's an ongoing process. It's not just because of COVID. This is something pre-COVID, and I'm sure it's going to continue well into the future, but it bodes well. One of the documents that was produced out of work of the CAST was a document titled A Reference List of Safety Elements to Monitor During a Period of Dynamic Change. Let's say that fast 3 times, but it's basically a checklist that we identified together as stakeholders of risks and issues out there. The FAA released that to other regulators as well as to other airlines around the world, and we're thankful for it, because working with our international brothers and sisters that fly aircraft for other airlines overseas. They are thankful for that information being released.
Well, thanks, Steve. Really, I think that the importance of data sharing and collaboration and certainly leadership from all sectors has been so important in making sure that we've been able to keep the safe system operating, that we have. And I'm sure that we will continue to have in the future. On relief efforts, one of the things that the agency did was to provide exemptions for some relief to be able to help get us through. And just going to ask just for a brief comment from Houston, Ron, and Sasha, just very briefly about how the exemptions help the airlines and businesses over the past year.
Yeah, I'll start off, Administrator. Just real quick, for us, it's been phenomenal. As I mentioned earlier, we're one of the few airlines that are still hiring. So our ability and the training, to bypass some of the traditional protocols related to oxygen mask uses and procedures, et cetera. A lot of concerns from the crew members, to be able to work through those, find equivalent levels of training that met the requirements was huge. Obviously, the medical with the reduction of AME availability, the extensions associated with pilot medicals, particularly with us, having to continue to find everything else to get those extensions, had tremendous impact. And then lastly, from a local level, our designees, because of some of the COVID protocols and some restrictions from the local office, the empowerment of our designees to have a little bit more responsibility, really a reflection of the trust that the FAA has in our professionals. And that's enabled us in a high production environment to not miss a beat. And so we're very grateful for the exemptions and the collaboration.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Ron?
Okay, I'll pick it up. I echo that. If the FAA was not so quick early on understanding the severity of this, we would be in a much worse place off than we are today. Their willingness to engage with us, listen to our issues, and react quickly is extremely beneficial to us. Expediting the change to 14 CFR 121.333 for pilots to don oxygen mask above flight level 410 instead of flight level 210. That was a great safety enhancement for our pilot groups. Crew members to carry extra hand sanitizer, SAFO 2009 to provide specific guidance for our pilots with operating within a COVID-19 program. As Houston said, the medical passport assistance, takeoffs and landings, emergency drills. You just walked hand in hand with us and really helped us to get through this as good as we possibly can.
Yeah, and I would just echo that. I mean, I think, your willingness to sit down and have the conversation was absolutely key. And it was key to maintaining the safety of the operation, because if we had been forced to operate as normal, it would have put our crews at risk. It would have put our operation at risk. It wasn't the way we could simply operate given the severity of what we were all dealing with and just the quick evolutionary change of what we were dealing with. So that conversation and willingness to engage with us was key. I would also add the slot waivers to that too, because obviously just with the business being what it is, the reality of passenger demand, requiring us and forcing us to sort of continue to fly as we were just wasn't reasonable and it wouldn't have been beneficial to safety and the health and safety of our crews or for sustainability for that matter. So that willingness to engage and take a leadership role in that area was just absolutely key. So thank you again for the collaboration.
All right, thanks, Sasha. Now we're going to shift here a little bit. I'm going to try to get us back on schedule here. So stand by for an audible here because I do want to get to some Q&A and I want to respect everybody's schedules. But we want to talk a little bit now. We've sort of talked about the journey that we've been on together and the adjustments that we've had to make. But we also need to be thinking about the future state of the industry with respect to commercial aviation. And, we've taken steps to make sure that passengers and employees are safe, but we want to look a little further ahead into the future. So with that in mind, how do we continue to leverage data to improve safety? We talked about that a little bit earlier. How can we measure the effectiveness of our safety efforts given the volatility that I talked about in my opening remarks? how much things have changed, and how are the FAA and industry continuing to share safety information. And we'll start with Steve and go to Sasha and Paul and Rick. Please try to keep your comments fairly brief, but I know Steve with the SIAS, and you mentioned CAST, identifying the risk elements that we need to pay attention to. That's an important thing as we move forward as well.
Well, as you said, the collaboration and data sharing is the key. And one early event that happened that we found out right when COVID lockdown started to occur, the airlines started to park aircraft very quick pace. We've all seen the pictures of the airplanes parked at airports, stacked nose to nose. And, basically we weren't sure where they were going and when they were going to fly again. But in the haste to get those aircraft parked, a lot of the data that was saved on board the aircraft was not being downloaded. And that was not by an error by the airline. I mean, you take an airline and chop it in half and say, now put all these airplanes in quick storage. I can't even park my 2 cars in my driveway without trying to figure out where each one goes. So you try to move that many airplanes into a space. It was identified early on by one of our pilot groups in our weekly ALPA meetings that they had found out that they did not get a lot of downloaded data from the aircraft they had parked. So I took that info forward to the SIAS group and said, hey, everyone, let's take a look at this and make sure that we're getting the data. And that was added to that checklist of things that we passed around to the industry. And so airlines went back to the parking lots, pulled out that data. We were able to take that information from when they were flying and use that to complete our data analysis and risk analysis going forward.
Fantastic. Sasha?
Yeah, no, Steve highlights a really good point, and it's something we're certainly taking a look at. I would just say that given the volatility that we've seen and the changes in the industry and the data, our approach is that a regular conversation about safety and risk has to accompany any study of any type of data. Obviously, we can't just rely on a dashboard to identify the risks that we're seeing. We also need to be collaborating with industry, talking with our partners, and really leveraging our safety roundtable process that we have within the company to make sure that we are, again, looking at the data, but also having those conversations. Are there other things that we should be looking at? What's coming on the horizon? Really expanding our SMS and including others who are making changes within the company or who are watching what's coming down the pike, making sure they're a part of those risk conversations so we can not only look at the data, but also be, eyes wide open about what's coming. I think that's absolutely critical.
Great, thank you. And Paul, and then Rick will close us up.
Leveraging data is so important to us, especially in non-scheduled operations. It requires that we assess multiple data streams for critical information as we monitor the globe for change. A lot of these data sources that we use can include the health authorities, the FAA, IATA, and the National Air Carrier Association. And it's allowed us some degree of real-time analysis of information sharing of the emerging risks to our operation. The support that we've gotten from our certificate management office in Dallas, Texas, and specifically from our principal inspectors has been critical to our success in supporting national security through diplomatic and military missions during the pandemic. This global pandemic has certainly been challenging, but the principles for us of safety risk management have really helped ensure that we provide service with the highest degree of safety in the public interest.
Thank you. And Rick, you want to bring us home?
Sure, I will. Thank you. I think I'd like to just accentuate a couple of things that have already been said. And when you think about where we were, even going into COVID with our voluntary programs and our SMS platforms, we were set up perfectly to run into this type of environment. And I think we've leveraged off of all those programs that we've had online, regulatory-wise and voluntary-wise. I think the value for us is what we do with that information, how that translates into actionable events that we can take on, like produce that safety elements document that CAS came up with. That is so vital to watch the system work and to be able to provide that awareness for everybody out there, regulatory-wise and also for the operators.
Thanks, Rick. All right, Jeannie. There's one more question that I was going to ask, but I think in the interest of time, we'll move on into the live Q&A. Actually, several of the panelists have already commented about there are some best practices that have developed that we've used. Sasha was talking about, virtual technology. Some of this some of the things that we've been doing, we'll want to hold on to. I haven't seen anybody that's figured out how to do a hybrid event really well yet. So we're still working on that, but I think it'll be a combination of face-to-face, maybe on more strategic engagements, but certainly a lot of problem solving and bringing people together rapidly. We can use virtual technologies on as well. So that really concludes the panel discussion. And now Jeannie's got some questions that she'll bring forward from our participants. And we've got some additional FAA folks who are joining us for the Q&A.
That's right. Thank you, sir. We are going to transition now into the live Q&A session. This is the fireworks session. So buckle up. We've got Jenny Boyle, Acting VP of SysOps, is staying with us, as is Rick Domingo, who's the Executive Director of Flight Standards. Also joining us is Dr. Susan Northrup. She is the Federal Air Surgeon here at the FAA. Welcome, Doc. And we also have Angela Stubblefield, who is FAA's Chief of Staff. Hi, Angela. And Ben Supko, who is the Director of FAA's Office of Hazardous Materials Safety. So welcome, everyone. Okay, let's see. Rick Domingo, this first question is for you. This comes from Tim. He wants to know if the FAA plans to extend any regulatory relief exemptions.
So first of all, great question. And I think this came up earlier, but I'll expand on a little bit more here is when we first started through this environment, one of the ICAO recommendations was that March 31st, 2021 would be a date that was far out there back then that we would sunset all the exemptions because we figured by then we'd be through most of this. We know that's not true. And we know as we've talked about on this platform here, that the industry has changed, and so has the way we've been reacting to the environment we're in. So the asset shortage that was there before may not be the same today. We've looked at that. We've also, in the exemptions we have granted, we've repeatedly put in there and built upon the safety risk analysis that people that were using these exemptions or had intent to use, that before entering in it, that exemption again, they would run their own SRA, because now they have performance data on how they were performing in that first exemption or second one. So we're still figuring on sunsetting any exemptions by March 31 of this year. We will look at and move into the normal way of conducting business, where on a case-by-case basis, somebody applying for an exemption would have to run through the Part 11 requirements. But we are still talking to our international partners with ICAO as well to see, how the world will move in that arena for exemptions.
Okay, thank you. Ben Supko, the next question is for you. What role does the FAA play in the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines?
Thanks, Jeannie. Before I jump into it, I do have to say it's actually been a huge honor. I'm the director of the HAZMAT program, but to lead a vaccine effort and the distribution of vaccines was such a promise for a positive impact on the community and really the whole world, and to really work with industry and see the collaboration and support. It's really been inspiring. But here's what we do. So as part of the U.S. Department of Transportation's overall efforts, we established the FAA COVID-19 Vaccine Air Transport Team in October to support the distribution efforts. The vaccine team employs a multidisciplinary approach that it's really integrated with much of what we do within the FAA, so safety management systems and also cargo safety. And we did that to flush out the safety issues and really have that planning and preparedness related to the safe and efficient air transportation of the vaccines. The team is working with aircraft manufacturers, air carriers, and other aviation stakeholders to provide guidance and information on the safe transport of dry ice and data loggers, air navigation services, including prioritization for flights carrying COVID-19 vaccines, around-the-clock air traffic services to keep air cargo moving seamlessly, approval for pilots and air traffic controllers to receive the COVID-19 vaccines under their medical certificate. And of course, they'd have a post-vaccination waiting period. And this is just a snapshot of the activities we've undertaken. There's more to view everything we've done. Just go to faa.gov/coronavirus and click on vaccine transport.
Thank you very much, Ben. And as Jenny said, some of us were out at the command center and saw that first flight come in, and it was very exciting. So thank you for sharing that with us. The next question, Dr. Northrup, you're up. Robert wants to know, why is there a 48-hour waiting period for pilots after the vaccine?
All right, it's actually for pilots and air traffic controllers. And the reason is these vaccines are approved for use in the United States under an emergency use authorization. Historically, at least in the 14 years I've been with the agency, we've never approved anything that was still experimental. In other words, not fully approved by the FDA for use in pilots or air traffic controllers. However, due to the critical nature of response to COVID-19, we felt it was warranted from a risk-benefit viewpoint that we get these shots in the arms to protect people. So for each vaccine that's been approved, we look at the emergency use authorization and closely follow what happens with side effects. These vaccines are not without side effects that could affect the safety in the national airspace as pilots and air traffic controllers work. However, if they're going to get significant side effects, they're going to do it in the first 48 hours. So we set the bar at 48 hours. Now, of course, anyone that's continuing to have significant side effects, they should adhere to 14 CFR 61.53.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Jenny, this next question is for you. Kendra asks, over the past few weeks, winter storms have caused significant transportation challenges across the country. What is the FAA doing to make sure these challenges don't hinder the delivery of vaccines?
Okay, that's a great question. Well, disruption is in the system is really nothing new. So this is really what the command center does best, and this is where I like to brag on them. So whether it's a natural disaster like a hurricane, earthquake, devastating fires, major equipment outages, they rise to the challenge. We're used to getting critical organs to your loved ones. Over the past summer, crucial PPE to our first responders, the life-saving supplies to devastated areas. So really, communication and collaboration has always been the key focus of the ATO. And now specifically to getting the vaccines delivered, we're working to ensure delivery by prioritizing the flights deemed critical by the operators, which we spoke to earlier. So how it really works is the air traffic control system command center receives the list of the priority flights, and we disseminate the list to air traffic control facilities to facilitate priority handling. And then the command center, the COVID Joint Crisis Action Team, or the JCAT that we spoke of earlier, ATO security, and all of the local facilities work together to track these flights to ensure that they are unduly delayed. And then operators that are identifying those flights that they consider critical, and as I stated earlier, many more flights carry the vaccine to the airport around the country. And then currently the ATO is prioritizing about 10 vaccines flights per day. Sometimes it's been up to 20.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rinaldi, did you want to weigh in on that?
But we do get the list, and we give it priority consideration. We were very nervous prior to doing our level 3 cleanings, our routine level 3 cleanings, that we would be in a situation where we had to do an ATC 0 while we were looking at a vaccine flight. And we know the vaccine is the answer to controlling the spread of this virus, and we want to make sure that we get it where it needs to be as soon as possible. Unfortunately, with the bad weather we've experienced in Texas and in Tennessee and other states the last week or so, some of our flights were not able to make it because of weather.
Thank you. Okay, this question, another question for Dr. Northrup. This is from Lisa. She wants to know what duties or activities are permissible during the post-vaccination observation period.
Thank you. All right. During the 48-hour post-vaccination observation period, a pilot may not act as pilot command or in any other capacity as a required flight crew member. Again, 14 CFR 61.53 applies. This would also apply if there are any lingering side effects from the vaccine. There are duties that are permissible. Those are the ones that don't require an FAA medical certificate, such as providing or receiving flight simulator or aviation training device instruction, ground instruction, or operational training not involving flight operations. So office duty and administrative tasks are fine. Deadheading and jump seating or distance learning are all acceptable. We are working with the department to finalize and include language on our Corona website that will address this question moving forward. And just so everybody knows, we're looking at potentially adding the Johnson & Johnson Janssen COVID-19 vaccine. And somebody laughed about having to say words that were tongue twisters. That one's one.
I'm glad you had to say that, not me. Thank you. Thank you, Doc. Okay, Angela, the next question here is for you. And this is from Todd. And he asks, he says, from a standpoint of the agency's role, let's see, oh, sorry, I'm wrong question. Nick wants to know, how are the various government agencies collaborating with one another to ensure safety and efficiency, even amidst the challenges that we face?
Well, thanks, Jeannie, and a pleasure to be here today. We're actually collaborating and in almost constant communications. In fact, I was late getting on to today's call because I was in a meeting with the interagency. And we have those calls both informally with a small group, particularly our colleagues at DHS and CDC, and of course our DOT colleagues are really in constant communication just about every day. And then we have the more formal processes through the National Security Council to deal with sort of bigger policy discussions. But this is really, when I look at where we began a year ago in the discussions between air carriers and a lot of the US government agencies who don't have a lot of connection and ongoing dialogue and relationships with our industry partners, it was a very sort of strained and difficult conversation. And now I think the amount of trust we've been able to build, the amount of understanding and education that we've been able to facilitate for our other USG colleagues to really understand how aviation works, and the tremendous amount of cooperation and collaboration that we've had from our labor partners, and of course the airlines and associations. Has just really been a game changer. So, you know, it's very much now people picking up the phone to somebody they've been working with for a year and having direct dialogue. We're bringing folks in at a much earlier point in conversations within the US government and sort of pulling back that curtain earlier, which yields better outcomes because we have better information and decision-making is much better informed. And so although it's been obviously a hard road for the last year, that work really has built relationships that I think are leading to more informed and expedient decision-making, but also hopefully are more responsive to our industry colleagues and helping the aviation system, you know, sort of reacting as dynamically as the system needs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Angela. And now, sorry for Todd who submitted this question. I'll try to get this right. So this is going to be for Jenny and Rick, either one of you or both. And Todd wants to know, from the standpoint of the agency's role as a safety regulator, can you share any lessons you've learned that might carry you into the future? Have you, like much of the business community, found instances in which working remotely has made you more efficient? Jenny, you want to take that first?
Sure. Let's see. Well, you know, when it comes to safety, you know, I look at some of the metrics that are out there, and the commercial aviation runway surface accidents and runway incursions and excursions and other incidents has declined 51% over the last 12 months, which is a significant percentage. And as we look at the air carriers and the IFR traffic counts that are out there, we can see those starting to climb, which is very exciting. And like we were talking a lot about the vaccine flights. What will probably carry to the future, as we had talked about earlier, some of these touch points that we're able to use some of the technologies that we have today in order to be a little bit more inclusive, and some of those folks that weren't necessarily in all of the same meetings, that we now have a lot longer tentacles that we can touch more of these people.
Okay, thank you. Rick, did you want to add something to that?
Certainly. Thanks, Jeannie. I'll just add a couple of high points here, and I think we've talked about some of this earlier. is even with our employees being first and foremost for their health and safety, what we've been able to achieve during this time is we can still get the work done. And I think that's a very important aspect for the FAA workforce to understand, and also the industry. That's not been a small feat. And so we've looked at things like we've mentioned, the VCT technologies that are available to us. I see that maturing for us as we move forward, because that's the best practice in current form that we can probably expand upon. I do think another area we're looking at is we've also issued a lot of deviations to our policy to help industry move along because of the asset shortage that they had. I think we're going to take a look at those deviations and see if they can become more so a common practice that's allowed without coming and ask for a particular policy deviation. So we're going to run the traps on that and do an after action report to see what best we can resolve and get that memorialized in our guidance. And then the last thing I want to mention is just the collaboration that we've had, not just internally with the FAA, but with industry. I mean, when we're all pulling together towards a common interest, I think what you're seeing is we can achieve a great safety continuum, but it does take communication and collaboration to do just that.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think this next question looks like Jenny and Paul Rinaldi, if you're still with us, if you want to weigh in, and Dr. Northrup. John wants to know, he says, we've seen a few instances in recent months where cases of COVID-19 have led to temporary closures of air traffic control towers and other facilities. Can you talk about the steps the FAA is taking to ensure the most reliable air traffic services possible? And I know we touched on this earlier, but if there's any more that you'd like to add to that. Jenny, you want to start?
Sure. Like you said, we did touch on that a little bit about these enhanced level 3 cleanings that we're doing now. We've come a long way from a year ago when we were had folks, as Paul can remember, in hazmat suits spraying the equipment, taking down the facility for a day, at first days at a time, in order to work through the science. And I have to say to Dr. Northrup, hats off to you. Thank you for bringing all the science to us and very patient educating us on as this has evolved and what we've been learning. And then with these new enhanced level 3 cleanings, really it's taking the existing custodial staff, training them, getting them in there during less peak times that we've collaborated with the unions in order to get these folks in to do these enhanced level 3 cleanings daily, to really almost reduce, not that it's going to completely zero out the need for maybe a short-term closure to do some cleaning. There might be an instance where a time or two that may occur, but we've really come a long way. Like I said, we're up to 77 facilities out of the 85 that we've earmarked to do these cleanings. And I'll turn it over to either Dr. Northrup or Paul.
Let's go to Dr. Northrup. I remember when we were all out at the command center, she was on speed dial in those early days, all hours of the day and night. So Dr. Northrup, you want to weigh in?
Sure. Early on, everybody remembers Midway, as the administrator mentioned. It became very apparent to us that the local and state public health departments were completely overwhelmed with the COVID response. So the Office of Aerospace Medicine, through the regional flight surgeon offices, swung into action, and we became the public health officials for the agency. So we did all the contact tracing, we did all the notifications that needed to be done. And another huge step that we took was we developed a team with a medical liaison between NATCA and the Air Traffic Organization, so we could talk through and be ready and educate the people that needed to be educated. So we were proactive in how we responded, and this took frequent interactions with the CDC and other public health authorities.
Thank you, Dr. Northrup. Paul, you want to weigh in?
Well, it has been a true collaboration, and Dr. Northrup's her whole line that she was working and really becoming. In the beginning, we were like, we need help. We can't rely on the states and the local governments and their health departments, because what was said on Long Island was different than what was being said in Las Vegas, and they were overwhelmed. And at one point, they said, well, aviation medicine wouldn't be able to do it, and Dr. Northrup stepped up and she did a fantastic job. And that really just given that sound medical advice and following the CDC guidelines have helped us tremendously. The ATC zeros, nobody liked them, but when you look at the grand scheme of things of impacting the operation for about an hour, so we can make sure that the next crew is coming in to a clean facility. Listen, nobody likes to delay an airplane at all or to have cancellations. We get that, especially while these airlines are suffering, but we also have to make sure that it is safe for the air traffic controllers, the supervisors, and all of the operational people to come in and do their job, and that they're not going to be exposed to the virus and then bring it home to their families. So it's really a tenuous line that we have been walking, and the routine level 3 cleanings we're doing now is helping tremendously.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have run out of time, so want to thank you to all of the participants for being here today, for the panelists and the people who watched and sent in those great questions. Thank you to everybody. And now let's go back to Administrator Dickson, sir.
Well, thanks, Jeannie. Nice job bringing us home again. And again, I want to thank all the panelists for joining us today and everyone who joined us online as well. We covered a lot of ground. There's still a lot more to this journey. We looked at how COVID-19 has disrupted the industry, how it affected our people. We've looked at the things that we're doing together to mitigate aviation safety risk and how we can continue to do that as we navigate through the months ahead. And as I said at the beginning of the meeting, the FAA and industry have been tremendously successful in driving down safety risk in commercial aviation over the years. Our collaboration, specifically with collecting and sharing safety information, has been the key to our success. And I think it's been foundational to our success together over the past year. And I know that we'll continue to do that. The FAA remains committed to ensuring the highest possible level of safety in aviation. We stepped up and made it clear that there will be zero tolerance for unruly passengers on flights through our special emphasis enforcement program and support of the air carriers and our labor partners throughout. With respect to today's panel discussion, I think that a couple of things really stood out to me, and that's the importance of when you're going through a time of rapid change in any large process like commercial aviation is. It's very important to fall back on things that that can be a stabilizing force. And SMS, collaboration, data sharing, making sure that we're keeping the lines of communication open and finding new and innovative ways of getting the job done. All of that is important. And I'm very proud of how we've been able to adapt. But again, there's a lot more to be done. The second thing is that out of crisis, I firmly believe that there will be opportunities that will be presented. And those who are able to adapt and take advantage of those opportunities are the ones who are going to be successful. So it is certainly our commitment at the agency to lead that effort across commercial and civil aviation, not only in the US, around the world, to make sure that we are agile and flexible and that we're able to adapt to the opportunities that'll be in front of us. I think one thing also is that as we move through the coming year, we will face continued uncertainty. Stuff is going to happen. We're hopeful that vaccinations will work well. The data up to this point looks very promising, and that will drive infection rates down. We're seeing a very steep decline at the moment, but it's coming off of a very high peak, and we can't let our guard down. And we're cautiously optimistic along with that passenger travel demand will see a resurgence. So there's still a lot of work ahead, but we've got to stay vigilant. Safety is a journey, after all, not a destination. We're never good enough. We've got to always continue to improve and never be satisfied or complacent. We set a very high bar, and we've got to continue to raise it and commit to continuous improvement in the U.S. and globally. So let's continue to use opportunities like this to collaborate, work together between the FAA, labor, and our industry stakeholders. Let's continue to share safety data. We've got a very strong safety culture in aviation that I think other industry sectors, other industries look upon with a certain degree of envy. But that success does not come without a lot of hard work. So I'm confident that working together, we can overcome any challenge. And I look forward to making sure that the U.S. Remains the gold standard for aviation safety, not only now, but for many years and decades into the future. So thanks, everyone. Please stay safe, stay vigilant, stay healthy. Please take care of yourselves and your families. And we appreciate your collaboration and leadership very much. And thank you for joining us today.